Okay, so you can understand and appreciate something with regards to the repatriation movement. And let's remember the national character and its attitude towards Mexico, towards Mexicans. Because it's not just Arizona, but the entire country. And again, the mass media can stir up public opinion. And all you need is hysteria. It creates this anti-immigrant experience. In this particular case, white beans, black beans, yellow beans, red beans, all of the beans in this era are going to begin to view Mexicans, the brown beans, as problematic. So let's understand the patterns of immigration history. It reveals the cycles of change that will continue to the present day. So let's understand this very clearly with regards to the cycles of change in immigration policy. Whenever there are economic labor necessities in the United States, the remedy becomes Mexican migration, which stimulates a movement to the U.S. and stimulates a movement of people to the United States. And again, let's reveal the cycles of change in immigration policy. Students, please understand this. Whenever there are economic labor necessities in the United States, the remedy becomes Mexican migration, which stimulates a movement of people to the United States. When those labor needs are satisfied, there oftentimes occurs an economic downturn, which results in immigration restriction and deportation. So this process occurs again when the United States is in need of labor. It is important to understand this cycle because it occurs numerous times in the 20th century. Today's controversy is but a reflection of this historical cycle. It is not anything new, but it is a part of the experience for every generation. And if you're a Mexican, it has to be faced. Again, my grandparents faced it, my parents faced it, I face it, my children will face it. Again, the cycles of change in immigration policy. The important thing about economic labor necessities in the United States, the remedy becomes Mexican migration. When the labor needs are satisfied, there occurs an economic downturn which results in immigration restriction and deportation. This is a cycle. It occurs again when the United States is in need of labor. So this cycle, we begin this cycle. The 1930s introduces us to this cycle. And of course, Los Angeles served as the model repatriating city. Let's go to Los Angeles and understand what happened to the people.
Closing time. The close of an era. In the 1920s, the great American word was prosperity. Now the 30s have begun and there is a new word. Depression.
As the Depression deepened, competition for scarce jobs grew fierce. In laundries, factories, construction companies, Mexican workers were replaced by U.S. citizens.
Devastating is a good adjective to use for Mexicans in Los Angeles in the Depression. Very quickly, by 1931, half the population is unemployed, much larger than the general Los Angeles population. That means a lot of the people that had had fairly secure employment before this period now are out of work.
My father lost a job. He didn't want to receive relief. He didn't want to receive it. He wanted to work. But like I said, there was no work for Mexicans. At least my mother was working as a maid in a wealthy family.
President Hoover, by 1931, is desperate to stay in office. He is roundly blamed for the Depression, and he begins to look for scapegoats. And it's his Secretary of Labor who begins to say, well, if we simply got rid of Mexicans, we would have jobs for everyone else. Los Angeles begins to target the Mexican community. The first ever immigration raid is done at the plaza. Immigration authorities are brought in from other places to kind of surround the plaza. They end up capturing as many Japanese or Chinese Americans at the plaza than they do Mexicans. And they deport 15 people that day. But what they wanted to do is scare people, and they accomplished that. In the weeks following that immigration raid, people were scared to go to work. They were scared to go outside. This created a great panic, not only among the Mexican community, but also among their employers.
In Los Angeles, the Mexican consul suggested that instead of persecuting Mexicans, the city buy train tickets for anyone willing to return to Mexico, now peaceful a decade after the end of the revolution.
Initially in 1931, when they start this, they have no problem filling the trains. There are plenty of people who are unemployed, who want to go back. By 32, they have trouble filling the trains, and that's when more coercive measures start to be used. County welfare officials begin to target certain neighborhoods that they know have a large number of unemployed Mexicans. They will go house to house. They will say, the cheese that you're getting, the bread we've been giving you is no longer going to be made available to you. Instead, we will give you this one ticket, and this is for a ride back to Mexico on a train. This is your only choice. You will get no more assistance.
For the Castañedas, the knock on the door came early in 1935, not long after tragedy struck the family.
My mother got sick with TB, and she died. She died in 1934, the 10th of May. I was making my first communion that day when my mother died. I remember when they buried her. I remember that they had to drag me out of there because I was so emotional of what was happening to her, what was happening to us.
Natividad Castañeda was offered 3 tickets for himself and his 2 American-born children on a train going to Durango in northern Mexico.
We had a trunk, a big trunk, and the first thing that he put in there was his working tools. That's what went in there, and a couple of blankets that we had, a few cooking utensils and dishes, and what little clothing we had. Because we lost everything. We arrived at the train station that was very crowded. People crying, children and adults. I was approached by a man. He says that I could stay here, that I would become a ward of the state. You know, like you hear about these orphanages. I didn't want to be in an orphanage. I wanted to be with my father and my brother. I had a family.
Between 300,000 and 500,000 Mexicans and Mexican Americans are forced out of the United States in the 1930s. There are plenty of Americans who said, we don't want the European immigrants anymore. There are plenty of Americans who said, we don't want any Italians, we don't want any Poles, we don't want any Jews. But there was never an action to round them up en masse and to send them back to their home countries. And this is what happened to Mexicans.
We went to live with this tia, my father's aunt. We really weren't welcome because, you know, there wasn't much room even for them. So we had to live outdoors, sleep outdoors. Pouring rain.